Beetlejuice's original script was a lot darker than what ended up on screen. Beetlejuice hits theaters this weekend, so here's some things I bet you never knew about the original. The idea for Beetlejuice started with horror author Michael McDowell, who Stephen King once called the finest writer of paperback originals in America today. In the mid-80s, McDowell was inspired by recent supernatural hits like Ghostbusters and Poltergeist, and wanted to try his hands at a screenplay like that. So along with his partner Lawrence Sinellick, they brainstormed some ghost ideas. I guess the two were kind of annoyed by their families at the time because that sentiment inspired the movie's main theme. McDowell also had the idea of what if ghosts living in a haunted house weren't evil, but instead good, and it was the humans who were bad. So McDowell then teamed up with Larry Wilson to write the screenplay, which was at first much darker. It was basically a straight up horror movie. The Maitland's car crash, for example, was going to be much more graphic. In that version, Barbara's arm was crushed in the crash. You know, in the final film, when the character says that her arm feels frozen, that's why. And instead of the dance scene at dinner, the dinner guests were all magically roped to their chairs. The limbo void the Maitlands go to with the sandworms had no worms, but it instead had massive clock gears that were shredding the fabric of time and space. At first, Beetlejuice himself was a winged demon who takes the form of a short Middle Eastern man. And then later drafts gave him dialogue written in African-American vernacular English. Beetlejuice wanted to kill the Dietzes and have non-consensual sex with Lydia. The name Beetlejuice comes from a red supergiant star in the Orion constellation. McDowell once said he was impressed by how many people were able to make that connection. In one early version, Lydia died and joined the Maitlands in the afterlife in the end of the movie. And the script was seen as a hard sell by some. Co-writer Larry Wilson, who was working in development at the time, gave the script to a Universal executive who asked him, "What are you doing with your career? This piece of weirdness, this is what you're going to go out into the world with? You're developing into a very good executive. You've got great taste in material. Why are you going to squander all that for this piece of shit?" But Wilson said they were able to sell it to Geffen not long thereafter. Meanwhile, Tim Burton was looking for future projects after his success with Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985. He'd been disappointed in a lot of stuff that was coming his way, thinking most scripts lacked imagination and originality. Burton knew McDowell and Wilson after they worked together on an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He read their first draft of Beetlejuice and liked it. So while Batman was going through a prolonged development process, he signed on to Beetlejuice. Warren Scarron then came on to rewrite the script, and Tim Burton encouraged him to make it more playful. Scarron turned the tone more comedic and softened some of the movie's edges. He added the sandworm void, which was identified in the script as Saturn's moon Titan, and also added the musical sequences, though he originally intended them to be set to R&B songs. For example, at the end of the movie, Lydia was going to dance to When a Man Loves a Woman. Scarron also toned down Beetlejuice, making him just a perv rather than a murderer and sexual predator. Sammy Davis Jr. was Burton's first choice for Beetlejuice. The producers also considered Dudley Moore and Sam Kinison. At one point, Burton approached Arnold Schwarzenegger for the role, but he was busy shooting The Running Man. Geffen then suggested Michael Keaton, who had done mostly TV guest spots and comedies Mr. Mom and Johnny Dangerously before that. Burton wasn't familiar with him, and Keaton wasn't even sure he wanted the role because he didn't get it. But eventually Burton and Keaton had a meeting and they watched each other's work, and so Keaton signed on board. Michael Keaton designed Beetlejuice's look himself, asking for mold on his face. He wanted his hair to look as if he'd been shocked, and have his clothes come from all different time periods. Winona Ryder beat out Sarah Jessica Parker, Brooke Shields, Lori Loughlin, Diane Lane, Molly Ringwald, Juliette Lewis, Jennifer Connelly, and Alyssa Milano for the role of Lydia. Alyssa Milano was the runner-up for the role. Ryder apparently impressed Tim Burton with her performance in Lucas. Kirstie Alley was Burton's first choice for Barbara, but Cheers wouldn't let her out of her contract to do it. Sigourney Weaver, Linda Blair, Goldie Hawn, Laura Dern, and Linda Hamilton were all considered before Gina Davis got the role. Angelica Houston was originally cast as Delia, but got sick and had to drop out. So then Tim Burton approached Catherine O'Hara, who initially turned down the offer to take over that role. But she accepted after Tim Burton personally flew out to meet with her and persuaded her to do it. Catherine O'Hara met and later married production designer Bo Welch while working on the movie. Some accounts say it was Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara who suggested the calypso music for the dinner scene. Tim Burton once said it was hard getting actors to sign on to Beetlejuice as they didn't know what to think of the weird script. The movie features Dick Cavett, Robert Goulet, and Hollywood legend Sylvia Sidney in minor roles. Burton had to beg Sidney to do the movie. They'd later work together again in Mars Attacks, which ended up being her final film. Geffen gave Beetlejuice a $15 million budget, $1 million of which went to visual effects. Principal photography took place from March 11th to June 11th, 1986, 1987. Through the use of stop motion, replacement animation, prosthetic makeup, puppetry, and blue screen, Tim Burton intentionally made the movie look like the B-movies he grew up with. He wanted the effects to purposely look fake and cheap looking to give it that B-movie vibe. The movie takes place in the fictional town of Winter River, Connecticut, but the exteriors were shot in East Corinth, Vermont. They had to dam up a small creek in town to provide deeper water for the bridge crash. The Maitland's house was a facade built on a farm field 100 yards away from that bridge. When Michael Keaton first showed up to the set in full hair and makeup, the crew apparently chanted, "Juice, juice, juice," which is amazing. But here's a fun fact. The character of Beetlejuice has just 17.5 minutes of screen time in this 92-minute movie. Michael Keaton was only on set for 2 weeks out of this 3-month shoot. When Adam and Barbara are in the death office, a voice on the PA system announces Flight 409 is arriving at Gate 3. United Airlines Flight 409 was a real plane that crashed in Wyoming on October 6, 1955. With 66 casualties, it was one of the worst plane crashes in history up until that point, and to this day, no one knows why it crashed. The football players that are bothering Juno are a reference to the 1970 plane crash of Southern Airways Flight 932, which took the lives of 37 players of the Marshall University football team. When Beetlejuice reveals a hideous but unseen face to Adam and Barbara, audiences were initially actually going to see that scary face, and an elaborate makeup effect was created for it, but it ultimately went unused. The scene where Beetlejuice eats the fly is a tribute to the horror film The Fly. Geena Davis starred in the 1986 version of The Fly, and Michael Keaton himself was offered the lead role in that movie, but turned it down. Test screenings for the film went well, and audiences really loved Michael Keaton's character. So that led Tim Burton to film the epilogue where Beetlejuice has his head shrunk. That epilogue is a little bit more upbeat than Beetlejuice's previous ending, which would have left him to the sandworms. Burton hired Oingo Boingo frontman Danny Elfman to score the film after they previously worked together on Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Warner Brothers, who came on as distributor, hated the title Beetlejuice and wanted to call it House Ghosts. As a joke, Tim Burton suggested Scared Sheetless, and he was horrified when the WB actually considered using the title Scared Sheetless. But they stuck with Beetlejuice. The movie hit theaters on March 30th, 1988, and made $8 million opening weekend in the US, before going on to gross $75 million total worldwide, making it the 10th highest grossing movie of that year. Critics like the movie. Today, 81% of the 108 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive, and legendary film critic Pauline Kael called the movie a comedy classic. Beetlejuice won the only Oscar it was nominated for Best Makeup, making it the first Tim Burton movie to win an Oscar. In 2008, AFI named it 88 on the list of the 100 best comedies. Harry Belafonte's Deo, the Banana Boat song, first released in 1956, received significant airplay on the radio in 1988 as a result of the movie. When Glenn Shaddix, the actor who played Otho, died in 2010, Deo was the last song played at his funeral. Hey, remember when Netflix used to send out DVDs in the mail? The first DVD Netflix ever sent out was a copy of Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice would spawn an animated series that ran for 4 seasons across ABC and Fox from 1989 to 1991. There are 94 episodes of the show total, but as of September 2024, the show is not available on any major streaming service. You can buy it digitally on Amazon and Apple. In 2019, Beetlejuice became a Broadway musical starring Alex Brightman. It shut down during the pandemic, but due to fan demand, it came back in 2022 for one more year at a different theater. It was nominated for 8 Tony Awards, but didn't win a single one. The show launched a national tour, as well as productions in South Korea, Brazil, and aboard a Norwegian cruise ship. Swedish, Czech, and Australian productions are now in the works. In October 2020, Alex Brightman voiced Beetlejuice in an episode of Teen Titans Go. The sitcom community carried out a years-long tribute to Beetlejuice. During the first 3 seasons of the show, a character said the word Beetlejuice once a season, and then after the 3rd season mention, an extra in a Beetlejuice Halloween costume walked by in the background. And now, after 35 years, a sequel is heading to theaters. It's been a long road for this sequel, which was first considered in 1990. It was going to be called Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, and the cast was on board, but over time, Tim Burton lost interest. Original screenwriter Michael McDowell was writing a sequel to Beetlejuice when he died of AIDS in 1999, and it seemed like a real possibility in the 2010s that Beetlejuice would get its sequel when Seth Grahame-Smith was hired to write a new draft. Tim Burton and Winona Ryder even spoke publicly about that sequel in 2014 and 2015, but it took another 10 years for it to actually happen.